my whole thing is, if you're not financing me, feeding me, or fucking me, it's none of your business. If I'm going to sit here and say I'm a guy just like everybody else, then why do I have to parade around and tell everybody I'm trans? I'm saying I'm a guy like everybody else, so what's the point of saying it?
Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Pickles and Vodka, the unfiltered mental health podcast where we talk about all the things we don't talk about in real life. My name is Christina, your host, and I'm currently sitting in my apartment just like sweating up a storm because we're currently in the middle of a heat wave here in Seattle, as many of you are in other parts of the world. It's going to reach like 108 degrees tomorrow, I believe. Which is insane because I think I heard something like in the last 300 years, Seattle has had like 300-degree days or, 100-degree plus days. And then this weekend we're having 3 100-degree plus days. So it's kind of scary. And no one here has AC really. So everyone's freaking out. I was gifted a box fan by a friend that I have going full blast, but obviously I turned it off to record this, so I'm going to make the intro short and sweet so I can get back to attempting to cool myself. But yeah, today I am interviewing with Micah Roldan. He is a trans activist, youth mentor, YouTuber, and all-around motivational guy. He's the host of Realistically Free, which is a podcast for personal development, life, relationships, advice, and mentorship, using his own personal experience. Today we talk about the intersection of mental health and race, gender and sexual identity, what it means for relationships, and it's a really great conversation and I can't wait for you to hear. Like I said, this is going to be short, but first, I guess let me update you a little bit about my life. If you're new to the podcast, I am currently in eating disorder recovery. I've had bulimia for 15 years now, and earlier this year I was in treatment for 3 months. I got out, and I guess I've had a few lapses since then. Well, okay, let's just call it a relapse. I've had a relapse since then, but every day I'm getting a little better. I'm trying my best to adult and eat healthy food and let myself rest when my body's telling me to let it rest. Last week I was telling you I had shin splints from overexercising, and I still got them. They refused to quit, and it's been a real lesson in patience for me. It's also kind of made me look hard at my habits and what I need to change. So if you are like me and you use overexercising as a way to either purge calories, or if you just really like walking like I do, maybe listen to your body and don't get shin splints like me, because there's nothing you can really do about them and they will never go away. What else? I feel like I've been pretty AWOL this week as far as podcast stuff goes. I've been exploring a lot of new job opportunities and hopefully finalizing out an apartment in Virginia tomorrow. So by the time you listen to this, I'll know for sure, but that's been going on. I'm almost about to pay my last month of rent in Seattle before moving to Virginia, and it's really wild. It's honestly a relief because rent here sucks, but it also really sneaked up on me. I remember being in treatment in January and making the decision to move back to the East Coast to be closer to my family and just focus on recovery. And it seemed like so far away. Like I remember thinking, oh man, I don't want to have to wait the whole summer, because at the time I was struggling really hard and I was alone. And since then, I haven't felt so much alone. Since then, there's been a lot of good things happening in my life. I'm meeting a lot of new people online and offline, going on some dates, starting to sell my belongings. It's all very exciting, and I'm trying not to let it overwhelm me. So I know I said at the beginning of Pride Month that I was going to be releasing episodes on a weekly basis, and I have been doing that this month, But as I'm sure you've noticed, I've been late a few days on some of them, and it just kind of stressed me out. Not to say that I'm not going to continue to do it moving forward. I'm going to try to keep doing it weekly, at least until I move in August. But yeah, I mean, I just have so many great interviews with guests that I want you all to hear. But if I do end up skipping a week here or there or posting an episode late, don't hate me. I'm just doing my best over here. With that said, I'm going to jump into my interview with Micah. I hope you all enjoy and are staying safe this final weekend of Pride Month. As always, thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to follow me on social media to say hi. All right, here is the interview, and enjoy. So you just called yourself a boomer. How old are you?
I'm joking. I was completely
okay.
joking.
I was like, you look very young for your age.
How old do you think I am?
I hate this question. 30.
Oh, come on. I'm 27.
26?
I'm 27.
Oh, okay.
You were close. I feel like I'm going through a midlife crisis already.
Well, you get to talk about all of that today on the podcast. Aren't you excited?
I heard you like cursing a little bit in your last episodes, but I don't know if that's like a no-go or not.
Oh, yeah, you can say whatever you want.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
You mind if I grab a cigarette while we
talk? Yeah, go for it.
Cool, 1 second.
That's funny you say that, because I always like vape while I'm doing interviews, and like I always felt like it's unprofessional.
Yeah, I don't care. Some people do.
Yeah.
Some people do. So depending on like what I'm doing, I'll like hold off and not. I gotta quit smoking. It's such a disgusting habit.
Hey, we all have our vices, especially right now. I feel like I'm just practicing harm reduction these days.
I'm with you on that.
So welcome to Pickles and Vodka. I really, really appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
It was so kind of last minute. And like I saw your podcast and I listened to like a few episodes. It's so hard to choose because there's so many good topics you cover.
Thank you.
Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. You should introduce yourself to the listeners.
What's up, everybody on Pickles and Vodka? My name is Micah, and I am a motivational speaker, a mentor, and a mental health advocate, specifically dealing with trans-masculine individuals. And I run a YouTube channel and a podcast.
Wow, that was so much more professional than anything I could have done. So you are here to tell me about yourself and your story. So I usually ask people about their childhoods first, like what if mental health was discussed or how that was like.
I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder 2, basically when I was like probably about 10 years old, 11 years old. So I've struggled with mental illness like essentially my entire life, whether it be like, with if you didn't know bipolar disorder, especially bipolar disorder 2, there's 2 phases. There's manic phase and then there's depressive phases, which now I don't think the DSM even calls it bipolar disorder anymore. I think it's called like manic depression. It's basically the difference now. So basically, I've dealt with mental illness my whole life. I was a drug addict for probably about 8 years. From the time I was like 12 up until I was about 20 years old. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I currently reside in Pennsylvania. So I've had a fucked life, basically. Like I don't think we'd have enough time in this episode for me to describe my entire life. Other than I'm in a good place now. I've been sober going on 8 years.
Congrats. That's amazing.
Yeah. I've gotten my mental health in check, so I'm a big advocate for people speaking to a therapist, life coach, someone that can help them through their journey. Like you were saying earlier, we all have a story. We all have somewhere we came from that fucked us royally. We all have baggage, basically. So I'm a big advocate for getting somebody to talk to, even if it's a friend, someone you can vent to that can try to help you through it, but hopefully a positive person, because we don't need more negative bullshit.
Yeah, can you imagine if a therapist were like just shit on you all the time and it's like,
yeah, no,
I don't know.
I've heard some stories, and I've had some myself with some, therapists that weren't very the most caring or the most engaged, which kind of put me off to therapy for a couple years, because I started therapy probably when I was about 8, and I got really, really attached to this one therapist. And of course, U.S. insurance is garbage. So I only had 50 sessions of like therapy with this woman, but I got super attached to her. And I remember like we had to stop seeing each other, and it fucked me up. And it just made me not want to see therapists anymore, because it made me feel like, oh, they just want money. And when there's no more money, they don't care about the person anymore. Obviously, I was a child, so.
That's so traumatizing.
Yeah. So I can see why a lot of people have a lot of, especially coming from a Latino background, a lot of mental health is pretty much swept under the rug. Like, if you go to therapy, you're crazy. So, and I know that's very prominent for people of color when it comes to therapy. It's like, no, you're crazy. You don't need to go speak to those people. You don't need to speak to a shrink. It's all negative verbiage around going to therapy.
I'm glad your family took you, in the first place. And then I was gonna say, like, your symptoms must have been pretty bad to get to that point.
I had tried to kill myself at a very young age. Like I said, I came from a rough life. We were homeless many times throughout my life. We moved around a lot. My father was an aircraft mechanic, and so he was trying to find better employment, and he was still in school, and there was a lot of stuff going on back then where, at the point when I tried to kill myself in school. So my mom at the time really had no choice but to put me into therapy. It was that or like CPS. You know what I mean?
Gotcha. But only 50 sessions.
Correct. So once the sessions were over, I don't know. They were just like, cool, like you're fine. Like you don't need therapy anymore. Did
they treat you differently after that, or before maybe?
My family or the therapist?
Your family.
Not really, because again, and when it comes to people of color, like mental health is not something that's discussed. It's like, okay, you went to go talk to that lady, like you're fine now. They said you're fine. There's nothing else that we need to discuss or talk about. And so I struggled for a lot of years with that, like not having that outlet or anyone to talk to, and deal with my because the reality is I'm a big believer in the fact that even, medications and stuff like that, it's just dealing with the symptoms. And I feel like therapy really kind of tries to attack the root cause.
Totally. Yeah, my therapist said something so good the other day. I was complaining that I felt like I was just putting a Band-Aid on my problems. And his response was, well, sometimes we need Band-Aids. Like, Band-Aids aren't bad.
Mm-hmm.
They keep you from getting infected. They keep the site clean. Like, why do people say that like it's a negative thing? And that kind of got me thinking.
I think it's not necessarily a negative thing, but for my specific case, I would say it was a negative thing because it kind of, as when you're a child, the things that you experience as a child mold you and shape you into who you become as an adult. So it taught me that my feelings don't matter, that what thoughts I have don't matter. You see what I mean? So it really wasn't a healthy situation when, again, it's very prominent for people of color. It's like, okay, you saw that person. They said you're good. You don't need to talk about this anymore. So to not have a therapist at that point, I kind of spiraled at that point out of it. I started just, drinking, became an alcoholic, was, doing all types of drugs. I mean, I tried everything under the sun except for shooting heroin. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I did a lot of crazy shit in my youth, and it was just not a good time. And I think a lot of it could have been avoided had I still continued to be in therapy.
But it's like you said, you didn't really have a choice. I mean, you got the 50 sessions, and then, I'm glad you even got those 50 sessions, but it sounds like the transition back to regular life wasn't very smooth at all.
No, and it's not like there was any warning beforehand of like, hey, we're getting close to being done with these sessions. It was just like, hey, I left my session, and it was like, cool, like, bye. Like, it's just a horrible situation. But so I say all that to say I understand why a lot of people have this bad taste in their mouth, when they have experiences like you were saying earlier with a horrible therapist sometimes. Not that she was a horrible therapist, but she was in an impossible position, So the system needs reform, in my opinion. But I can see why people stray away from therapy, especially as people of color, when you're already told your whole life that if you go to a therapist, it's because you're crazy or something's wrong with you or that you can't benefit from it. And you have to just learn to suck it up so to speak, and keep on moving, keep on pushing.
Yeah. So you were 8 when you got that therapist and lost her?
Yeah, I was like 8 or 9. Well, sorry, I was probably like 9 or 10 actually, because I just thought about that way. I didn't move to Pennsylvania until I was like 10.
So at that point, you had already been diagnosed as bipolar too?
No, I wasn't diagnosed till I was probably about 10.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
What led to that diagnosis?
I don't know, to be quite honest with you. I was so young that I don't really know what happened there. I do remember as I got older and I got back into therapy, finally as an adult, then it was like, oh yeah, you have bipolar disorder. And the what led to that diagnosis was the fact that I at that point now, by the time I went back to therapy, I was probably about 18 when I finally went back to therapy, and I was still on drugs pretty heavily, still an alcoholic pretty heavily. And I tried to get myself into therapy just because I was trying to, get clean. And, I was homeless at that point. I was on and off homeless since I was 14. So by 18, I was like, yeah, I should probably try to do something different. And so get back into therapy, and they're like, yeah, you definitely, well, they called it manic depression because that's what the DSM calls it now, is manic depression. So they came to that conclusion because of the fact that my symptoms were, I was very impulsive. I did a lot of like crazy stuff. Like I'd feel like I was invincible. You know what I mean? Like I could do anything. I could jump off a bridge and nothing would happen. I would have these periods of time, probably like sometimes 2 weeks, sometimes months, of just like impulsiveness, insomnia. I could sleep for like 2 hours and be like going. I mean, drugs probably didn't have help that, because I'd go on binges and be, I'd go on those binges and be awake for 2-3 days at a time. But I could sleep for 2 hours and be like, cool, like, fuck yeah, I'm ready to go. Like, I'm ready to go do some shit,
God, I miss those days of being able to survive on 2 hours of sleep. I mean, not the drugs.
But even now, like at 27, I don't take any medications for bipolar disorder. I have in the past. I don't like it, and just with my addictive personality, I choose to abstain from any type of like prescription medications. I don't like the way they make me feel. They numb you. They make you feel like you're not. For me personally, make me feel like I'm not really experiencing life. And I found that for me, therapy has been that thing that has really helped me mentally, and kind of learn my thought patterns and learn my behaviors and learn when I'm kind of going into that impulsive mode and when I'm going into that depressive mode. Because what makes it bipolar or manic depression is the ups and downs. It's not a constant, if that makes sense. So you'll have moments of impulsiveness, elation, you feel invincible. At those times I might sometimes have like spending sprees and put myself in debt and do crazy shit, just not think about it. And then when I go through the depressive mode, it could be months that I could be depressed. I still struggle with sleep or just all types of stuff. And so I've learned through therapy how to like recognize that and how to keep those things at bay. You know what I mean? And I honestly believe that if I didn't have therapy, like I wouldn't be the person that I am now, able to have more control over those feelings and stuff. I'm not downing medication. I think medication is great for people who need it. Like you said, like, the Band-Aid. Sometimes medication helps people to feel a little bit more relaxed so that they can open up in therapy and deal with the pain points and deal with that deeper issue. My wife is, she has depression, and she takes medication, and that helps her a lot, so it's not that I down medication or think that I just don't think it's for everyone.
Oh, totally. Everyone's different. Someone might take it for like a year and then be able to get off it. Someone might be on it for life,
Exactly.
It's so subjective. You can't really use blanket statements here.
Exactly. There's so many nuances to it. And that's why I think I'm always pushing for people to, hey, go see a therapist, see a psychiatrist, find someone. I mean, I work with a few different therapists. I have a network of people that I can refer to, people that I trust, that I build relationships with, that I know are good people and that really do want to help the people that they see. So I'm always encouraging people to see a therapist.
Yeah, definitely. It is definitely a privilege to be able to have therapy, like, because I know it is less accessible to people of color. And I don't know, did you want to talk about your experience with that?
I would say that I'm grateful that I've been able to find people that I can vibe with, that I trust. Sometimes it's sad as a person of color. I don't see many people of color who are therapists. So sometimes there's not that relatability. My current therapist is a white woman, and there are some things in my life that she just is not going to understand. And it's not a slight against, white people. It's not a slight against her. She's an awesome person. I'm grateful to her to being my therapist and all the stuff that she's taught me. But at the same time, sometimes it's hard when you can't find people who are like you. And that's not a fault of the system. That's a fault of us as people of color who don't go into these fields that we should. And we should be involved in these fields where we can be that voice and be that shoulder to lean on for other people of color who are out there who need help.
Yeah. When you went to therapy you were saying like the people of color should be, go become therapists essentially. And I don't know. I feel like there's also roadblocks in place
of course,
for that to happen, and it was like you were saying before, like mental illness and is kind of looked down on and even feared. Is that an accurate assessment?
I would say it's not even, I don't think it's a fear in the sense of, oh, we're afraid of you being crazy. I think that there's a lot of pride. I would think that's a better word, pride. Because as people of color dealing with a lot of the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, we have to be strong, right? You don't want to look weak. You don't want to feel weak as you already are. Like you said, there are roadblocks and there are situations and things in place to keep us where we are, right? So I personally feel that the reason why our families and our culture will sit there and say, you don't need this, you don't need that, is because we want to appear and constantly be strong and have our heads held high of who we are and where we come from. And if we can have all of these things that beat us down and we still get through it, then we're strong. You don't need a therapist for that. And that's something that therapy can't teach you. Is kind of, I feel, the thought process behind why a lot of people of color look down on therapy so much. And I think that's more in the older generations, not so much the younger generation, like our age and younger. And even some people in their 40s and 50s, I would say. So I would say like Gen X and millennials don't really have so much of that mentality, but it's still definitely there. But I think as time goes on, that stigma will start to go away a lot more.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, and we need more conversations like this, I really appreciate you coming on here and talking about it. Sure. And it's just, the conversation needs to keep happening.
And I think people are sometimes afraid to have that conversation because to sit up here and say, no, like to my mom, my father, no, you're wrong. Everybody can benefit from therapy. We all have our struggles. We all have our stories. We all have a unique experience and trauma and baggage, and we can all benefit from therapy. And so I think sometimes it's a fear too to stand up to your parents and say, you're wrong. Yeah. You're wrong. And we should partake in this because it's a good resource. It's a valuable resource. And I think there's a little bit of fear in that to stand up to your culture and tell them that they're wrong when there's so much pride.
You said you're from a Latino family?
Yeah, I'm Puerto Rican.
Okay, cool.
I'm Puerto Rican.
Do you talk to your family at all? I know you've been through some rough times with them.
My father died when I was 12, so no.
Okay.
My mother, we are starting to build a better relationship now that I'm an adult. We're getting there in terms of that. And therapy helps. See, therapy works.
Yeah.
I wish I could get her into therapy, but that's another story for another time.
Right.
As they say, you cannot teach an old dog new tricks. So, I do speak with my family. My sister is definitely one of my biggest supporters. She's more of my mom sometimes than my mom is. And so I do speak with my family. And as someone who is Puerto Rican, family is very important to me and my culture.
Yeah.
So I try my best with my family, but I'm also a no bullshit kind of guy. Like, I don't deal with people who disrespect me or who don't take the same steps to try to be in my life that I would take to be in theirs. So it's kind of one of those things. I got some family that I deal with and some that I don't, and it just is what it is.
Yeah, relationships of any sort, they need to be balanced. Like, you can't put more effort in than they do because that just leads to resentment.
Of course.
I tend to pick the wrong people and learn the hard way. So you are not on any medication, you just do therapy. Okay.
No.
Does that work? That works okay for you? I just don't know much about bipolar or manic depression.
For me personally, it's worked out. I like going to therapy. My therapist deals with cognitive behavioral therapy as well as what's called EMDR, which is not, it's still kind of not a newer thing, but it's not something that's done a lot, but I enjoy it. I think that for me personally, the biggest part in helping kind of contain mental illness for me is coming to the realization that like I'm not my mental illness. I think that's the hardest part for a lot of us who struggle with mental illness, is that we identify so strongly with it. We'll say things like I'm depressed, or I'm bipolar, or I'm anxious. So we identify with it and we become attached to that identity of having a mental illness. And something that's helped me really deal with that and process and get to a better mental health space is by recognizing that I am not depressed. I may have depression or feel depressed sometimes, but that's an affliction of my body. That's not an affliction of me, if that makes sense. I've learned to separate me from the illness and to look at it objectively. So that's helped. And you know, meditation. I'm very big on meditation, mindfulness. I read a lot of books. I'm very, very fascinated by psychology and the way our brains work. And so because of that, I think I'm in a good place.
Yeah, that's great news.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you're talking about identity, like that really resonated with me. It's been something I've been thinking about quite often the last few days, actually. Just making your mental illness into your identity. Because, you know, I have a mental health podcast, and sometimes I'm known as the person who talks about mental health stuff and you know, it's vulnerable and brave, yada, yada, yada. But like, I feel like it's become such a huge identity now. I can't step away from it.
But you also said something key there. You said, I have a podcast. You are not a podcast. You have one, you know,
debatable,
you know? But I think that's important is to recognizing that and to not identifying with that, you know, is not making it a part of who you are, because at the end of it, it's not who you are. It's just a part of you, you know?
Oh, 100%. Like I'm passionate about helping people with addiction and talking about feelings and all that. But then at the end of the day, sometimes I just want to like close the computer and like read a magazine or something, you know, like I dye my hair. Like I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that.
Sometimes you want to separate. You want to separate from
it.
it.
There's also a comfort with having just one solid identity, you know?
But the thing about that is, if you've put yourself in a box, you've put yourself in a box to this one thing, and then that's a limiting belief. It limits your possibilities, where you know, who you could become or what other avenues you could take, you know? And so that's why I hate labels. I hate identifying with things. I just like to say, I'm just me. I'm just a person. I just exist. I'm just being here, you know?
I'm just vibing.
Yeah, basically. I know that sounds like some hippie shit, but, you know, I think that when you have that mentality, you actually start to find who you really are deep down.
Yeah, once you get rid of all the expectations, it's just like, who am I when there's no one around? We've talked about your bipolar and everything, and you, at the same time that you were dealing with that, like, you're also trans. So I want you to talk about that and like when you first started knowing that you were.
I think that I've always kind of known something was different about me. I didn't have the language or the verbiage to talk, like to say what was happening. So I'm not one of those people, and I talk about this frequently on like my YouTube channel and stuff. I'm not one of those people that like, I was just like, I was 5 and I knew I was a boy. You know what I mean? That wasn't my experience. First off, I was dealing with so much other shit going on that was like the last thing that I was worried about or concerned about. I think what the catalyst for me was back when I was about 16, 17, I tried to kill myself. I overdosed. I took a lot of drugs and tried to kill myself. And then, you know, at the time I was with my wife. We weren't married at the time. And, you know, she was just telling me like, you gotta do something different. You know, I remember I was laying in we had this really like, we lived in the most horrible place, like in the hood. I mean, there was a bullet hole in my window, like in my bathroom. Yeah. Like we lived in the hood. Okay. And I had binged out for like 3 days, and then finally, like, I just crashed, and I was going through withdrawal, and this was shortly after I tried to kill myself, and I'm laying on the couch, vomiting, withdrawal symptoms, all that shit,
Yeah.
and I was in and out of consciousness, and I remember I had woken up, and I looked over, and my wife was crying, and she had set the Christmas tree up by herself.
Mm.
And so I remember I looked over at her, and I was like, what's wrong? And she was like, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep watching you, like, kill yourself. Like, you don't care about yourself. You don't care about me, like, I can't do this. And so it was that was like the pivoting moment for me when I realized something's wrong with me, because I don't want to live. I care about these people and stuff, but I don't care about myself. I don't want to live. I'm not happy. And so I kind of got to this realization where I was like self-medicating. I was just trying to numb myself. I just didn't want to feel anything. I didn't want to deal with my problems, anything like that. So I started going to therapy, try to get off the drugs. I finally get off the drugs, and I finally got a decent job, and I'm working at an airport at the time. And I've always been a masculine person. Like, I've always dressed masculine. I've always looked at myself in a masculine way. But again, I didn't have the verbiage. Like, this wasn't, even though transgender people have been around since the beginning of time, we didn't have the visibility that we have now. So I didn't even know what it was. I remember back in high school, I had a friend who, I'm going to say he's a guy because I don't know if he's trans now or what. So, but he was a cross-dresser. And he dressed like a woman. He had long hair, like men. Like, I'd get into fights for him, and he'd get into fights because people thought he was a woman and would, get upset when they realized that he was a man.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, that was kind of like my first realization that there were people out there who could even present differently than how they were born. Now, granted, I don't know if he is transgender or not. This was just my experience. You know what I mean? So then I was like, okay, I'm working in this male dominated field. I kept constantly getting called sir. Right. And so I'm in my therapy office. I'm talking with my therapist, and I remember being really angry and telling her, like, it's pissing me off that people keep calling me sir because I feel like I should be a man and I'm not, but yet they see me that way. But why can't I be that way? That was like the aha moment of like, oh, something's going on with me. Like, what's happening to me? And once I started like kind of uncovering that with my therapist and dealing with a lot of trauma, processing all of that, and kind of getting to a better headspace, that's when I learned, oh, I can do that. I can actually transition. And so the more I processed trauma, things I had repressed, the more I started realizing that even since I was a kid, I had those feelings. When you're a kid and you have your imaginary friends and, you have your imaginary playtime, and I always saw myself as a boy, but I physically did not look like a boy. So it was always this confusion within me, like, but this is not how I look. And especially growing up in a Latino household, there are very, very clear gender roles. This is what women do. This is what men do. You cannot do this. You cannot do that. And da 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 da. And it was all these expectations from my mother, from my father, especially not only them being Latino, but then on top of them being super religious. So it was all of these expectations on what I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to do. Then I started dating girls, and people would sit there and call me a lesbian. I was like, it never felt right. So people would call me that, but I never called myself that. I was like, I'm not a lesbian. I just like women. Like, it's normal. Like, what do you mean? I didn't understand, because I didn't make that connection. Again, I didn't know that trans people even existed, or that was a thing, or that could even be a potential that you could do. So that kind of brought me into, like I said, therapy and everything I just explained.
Yeah.
And then I took a long time. I took a year off of social media at this time. This was now almost 7 years ago. I took a year off social media. I literally I had a complete media blackout. I didn't watch TV. I didn't listen to the radio unless it was like music, I didn't, I didn't watch TV. I didn't go on Facebook, nothing. Like I just complete media blackout. And I did that because I'm the type of person, I overanalyze everything. And I want to make sure that whatever it is I'm thinking or feeling is coming from me and not an influence of something outside of me. So I stayed in therapy, did that. And then I started kind of playing in a sense with my gender, but I did it at home. And so the only person that knew at the time was my wife. I was already legally married at this point. And so My wife is a, she does makeup and stuff, so she would draw a beard on me. She would call me Micah and he, him, and I started wearing men's underwear because that was the only thing masculine that I didn't do. I wore men's clothes, I just never wore men's underwear.
Yeah.
So that to me was like this big thing, like, oh shit, like I can wear men's underwear, like this is awesome. And I did that for like a year, and I got to a point where I broke down, and I was like, I was in the shower, and me and my wife were talking, and she was like, so what does like this mean for us? Because my wife at the time, and still my wife identifies as a lesbian.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. I have plenty of questions about your relationship, but I'm excited.
I will get into all of that. I'm not offended by any questions as long as they're not like inappropriate questions. So I said, she said, what does this mean for our relationship? Because she's a lesbian, and here I am telling you I'm a man. And, it was a lot of struggling, and it was a lot of tears. And I remember I got to the point where I said to her, I have to try this. I have to go for it. I have to try. I want to find out if I can medically do this. Because now at this point I had some knowledge of trans people. I knew that there were male to female trans women who were able to medically transition. I started learning about there being other people like me, female to male, who were transitioning and medically doing it. And there were procedures I could do, and there was, hormones I could take, and there was a way I could physically become who I had always felt that I was. And so, like I said, because I had taken all that time to really like think about this, I got to a point I cried, and I honestly, at that point, it was a do or die situation for me. I felt in that moment, if I don't take these steps and try, I'm going to kill myself, because there's no point in living if I can't live happy. If I can't be who I am, then there's no point in me living. And it was from there on, I started taking testosterone. I started medically transitioning. I got my name changed, had surgery, and we can get into all of those things. And from there, it was like, I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life. Like, I feel like I'm excited for the future holds. I want to see tomorrow. I want to live my life. I've never felt like that. I've always been depressed. I always wanted to kill myself. I had attempted suicide 3 times in my life. This was the first time when COVID hit. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to fucking die. I don't want to die anymore. Like, I want to actually live. I want to see where my life can go.
Isn't that wild? Just like the concept of looking forward to things. Like,
it is wild.
It's so crazy.
It is wild.
Like, crazier than anything else you said tonight. I'm just like,
it's wild.
What?
As someone, I'm sure as someone who struggled with addiction, that there's a point where you're like, you don't think about the next day. You think about the next time you can get high.
Oh, exactly.
That's the next moment. And you think about, okay, like, you don't really think about dying. You're just like, I'm ready to die. Like, I don't give a shit. Whatever happens, happens. Like, it's just not, you don't think about tomorrow. You think about right now. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with thinking about right now.
It's definitely a coping mechanism. Like, if I tried thinking further than right now, I would probably, kill myself or something. It's like, yeah. It's hard. Sometimes, like, your body just shuts down everything, and except for the bare minimum, And the bare minimum is, surviving till I get my next high.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how long have you known your wife?
I've known her since I was 16.
Okay.
Actually, if you really want to be technical, we've known of each other since we were probably about 15. But we were always in each other's circles, but we never really talked to one another until we were about 16.
Okay. And that's the same age that you found out you were trans?
That, when I think back on my life, I think that was when it was like, that's when things were starting to escalate for me. I would say I've known since I was a kid, but I didn't know. You know what I mean? Like, I when I think back on my life, they seem like puzzle pieces, and they all kind of fit and make sense now. But in the moment, I couldn't see that picture. I didn't know what was happening. So for me, I usually say I didn't really know until I was probably about 20. Well,
yeah, because you were just a kid, and you thought, did you think you were a lesbian?
I've always liked girls. I never considered myself a lesbian. I never said I was a lesbian. I never, because I didn't know that. I didn't have the language to explain I am transgender. So to me, when I would tell people, I would literally tell people, no, I'm not a lesbian. I just like women. They look at me like I was fucking crazy. Like I had two heads. You know what I mean? Like, what do you mean? You're a girl and you like fucking women. You're a lesbian. And I like, no, I'm not a lesbian though. Even to me, that made sense because it was like, I couldn't really explain, no, it's because this isn't right. Like, so I don't see myself as a girl. So therefore I'm not a lesbian. I couldn't explain that.
Did you date growing up?
Yeah, I've dated girls basically my whole life. Basically my whole life.
I also wanted to ask you about transitioning and
Sure.
how you felt, because that's huge. So that's a lot of things to do, from like the medication to the surgeries and like telling people.
I actually didn't tell anyone when I didn't have the whole coming out story like a lot of people do, because I personally didn't feel like it was anybody's business. I felt like I'm living my life. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not doing anything to anyone. I'm living my life. And so the only person I actually would say that I came out to was my wife.
Okay.
And that was the only person I felt like I had an explanation to give anyone to, because I was married to her. And when you're married, your whole thinking, your whole thought process is different, because you're not just thinking about yourself. You have to think about your partner, so I came out to her and I was like, this is what I'm feeling. And she knew everything that was going on as it was happening. This is how I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm going to do. And she was, she wasn't as supportive at first, because there was questions that she had for herself now, and her identity and her sexuality so she was processing things on her own, and I was processing what I was going through on my own to a certain degree. In terms of like my family, I didn't really come out. I mean, I went to my sister and I'm like, hey, by the way, like I'm trans and I'm medically transitioning now. And she was like, oh, okay. Like, of course I had to explain what that meant,
right,
because she didn't know what that meant, and so I had to explain to her, hey, this is what this means. It means I don't identify, like I don't feel like this body matches who I am.
Can I just say, I have a lot of respect for you for not having this huge coming out story. I think when you said it's not, well, of course, but when you said it's not anybody's business, like that really resonated, because it's not.
It's not, to a certain degree. I understand why people come out. I understand why people do it. I understand, because there is a fear of like not being accepted. I've lost family for this. I've lost friends because of this. I've lost people that I cared about because of who I am. And I face discrimination because of it. I've had death threats. I've had all those things because I simply exist, not because I'm doing anything to anyone, not because I'm a shitty human being. No, just because I exist and people don't understand. And that's kind of why I do what I do on YouTube, on my podcast, because I want to be a voice that people can listen to and say, oh, you're just a human being like everybody else. So granted, I also like to answer questions and educate people so that people can understand and try to conceptualize, because if we don't explain this, I can't expect you to understand. I can't expect you to respect something that you don't understand.
Yeah, especially when you've been brought up in this society, this current generation, I think, is a little more aware than past ones, but we're all still growing,
And we're all trying to figure it out. Like, this shit don't come with a book, And so, like I said, I didn't really come out to nobody. It was more of just like, I just started transitioning. I just started doing my thing. I started taking hormones. I was of age. I was of sound mind. I was in therapy. I can make my own decisions. I don't need to explain myself to anyone.
What was the process of getting on hormones? Like, once you decided you wanted to medically transition, like, what did you encounter any like obstacles to that?
There is definitely a lot of obstacles. People think that, oh, you can say you're trans and now like you go and transition and it happens like this. It doesn't happen that way. And it also depends on where you live and what the laws are and so there's a lot there. But for me personally, I had to have a letter from my therapist saying that I was basically mentally capable of making that decision, that I was mentally able to, I could go into this and understand full on well what I was getting myself into. Sometimes they have a lot of requirements, like you have to live as the other gender for a year. Some places have requirements that you have to see therapists for a year at least before they'll allow you to get hormones. Then there is what's called informed consent, meaning you can go to a doctor who specializes, like an endocrinologist, or even like a Planned Parenthood, somewhere that specializes with gender affirming services. And they'll allow you to do what's called informed consent, where you have to be of age, obviously, to give consent, which that's different, I know, for whatever state you're in. But I know here it's 18, and you can say to them, this is who I am, and they'll give you a sheet of, as long as you're armed, that'll tell you all the side effects and all the things that can happen and things that they don't know about and all this other stuff. And you sign the paper that you understand what you're getting yourself into.
I'm so curious about your wife. You guys were like both taking some time to like think about things and where you were
Mm-hmm.
at, right? And I know you said earlier that she's a lesbian, and so I'm curious like how you eventually got past that or got through it.
Everybody always asks that question, especially when I'm like, yeah, my wife's a lesbian. They're like, no, she's not. No, my wife is still a lesbian. She will tell you straight up, like, I'm a lesbian.
I promise if I had had more time to prepare, I would have prepared some spicier questions for you.
You're all good. Yeah, no, with her, it was hard. We were on the verge. We almost had a divorce. We were going to get divorced because a lot of it happened from my own insecurity. There's a lot of toxicity within the transgender community. There's a lot of expectations society and the community has upon relationships and people in general. And I might get shit for saying that, but it's the truth. And I started internalizing a lot of things that people were saying. Well, you can't be with someone who says they're a lesbian and you're a man, because then you're not a man, or they don't see you as a man, or they don't respect you as a man. And it was just like all this shit that I started internalizing. And so I started taking that out on my wife and being like, you have to change your sexuality. You can't say you're a lesbian. If you're going to be a lesbian, don't tell people you're a lesbian, because people look at me like weird when you say that. And I was putting a lot of expectations on her. And eventually she was already confused with how she felt, especially when my voice started getting deeper, when my body started to change, when my facial hair started coming in. She was already like dealing with that on top of me telling her, now you have to change who you are. And so we were on the verge of divorce, and she was like, I love you and I'll support you, but I don't know if I can be with you. And that shit hurt, but I respected it. Like, I understood that you got to do what's right for you too. I would be selfish to try to make you stay in a situation that you're uncomfortable with. And so, we kept talking about it, and I started, because I was in therapy and I was bringing up a lot of these things and working through all of my own shit, I got to a place that I could feel secure with myself and be like, you know what? If you're telling me you love me because it's me, like, I personally believe that sexuality is fluid. And my wife would tell you the same thing. Sexuality is very fluid. She identifies as a lesbian. We walking down the beach on the boardwalk, she'll see a fine woman and be like, damn, babe, look at that fine woman. Now, that's human nature. You can't help what you're attracted to and what you're aroused by. I'm not going to be mad at you for that. Even if it was a man, I wouldn't be upset with her for looking at a man. I look at women all the time. You know what I mean? So that's just reality. But we got to a place where she sat me down. We had a conversation, and it was like, look, I love you. Yeah, you're not a woman anymore. You don't look like a woman. You don't sound like a woman. You don't, your parts don't look the same. Like, everything is different. But I love you. You're the same person. Inside, you're the same person. You look different, but you have the same morals, the same character, the same thought process. You are the same person. You just look different. Or now you look like what you've always felt inside and what you've always presented and projected to me. But now I'm physically seeing that.
I love that. Like, I think we focus too much on labels and like, what am I? What is this? Like, what, when we should just enjoy it and be like, hey, exactly. I found someone I love. Why question it?
Exactly. And she was just like, look, at the end of the day, like, you're the person I want to be with. It doesn't matter what parts you have. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter what you sound like. You're still the person I fell in love with. I love you. That's it. And I personally believe when you have an intimate connection with someone, and I feel like that sometimes can turn into a sexual thing, because that was a definite hump in our relationship, in our sex life. It was because it was like, she's attracted to women. I look like a woman to you? I know the audience can't see me, but I don't sound like a woman. I don't look like a woman, So to her, it's like, I'm fucking a man, because I'm a man. So it's like, I'm fucking a man. This is weird,
Yeah.
And so it was a definite like learning curve. And you take that into account with all the like emotional disconnect that we had, made that so much harder, especially, I'm about to mansplain over here, but women are much more emotional not in a bad way, meaning they need that emotional connection. And at least that's what my wife needed. She needed that emotional connection, that intimacy. And for me, it's like, I'll fuck anything. You know what I mean? Like, I'll put a bag over your head, you know, it's whatever. Like, I don't need to look at your face, you know, like.
So romantic.
But it's the truth though. Like, it's the truth. Like, you know, it doesn't matter. Like, so once we were able to like reconnect emotionally and get in a understanding of each other and we stopped worrying so much about how society was viewing us and how all of these labels were putting us in this box and doing all that, then we were able to really like flourish in our relationship.
Sometimes when I find myself influenced by other people's judgments, I think, okay, what if it was just me and this one person alone in a compound, no one else? How would I act around them? And that's the answer to my question, you know, like if I didn't have to worry about labels, if Facebook wasn't a thing or if whatever, once you get into the labels are bad kind of way of thinking, I think all of your other perspectives kind of start to shatter.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that it's understandable, as it's a part of the human condition. We need something to feel like we belong and to connect with other people. So we use these labels to identify with one another, to relate to one another. But then we take that to this whole other dimension where it's like you're in a box now. Now, if you're not that thing, you don't belong anywhere. So people kind of put themselves in this box and refuse to look outside of it because who would they be? Where would they fit in? So they'll force themselves to stay a certain way because it makes them comfortable in another sense, you know?
Goes back to the identity thing we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And so once we got past that and stopped caring about what society was saying, what the transgender community was saying, and it's sad. For me, it was really hurtful because it was coming from the community that says, you can relate to me. It's telling me I'm wrong for loving someone just because they don't identify a certain way. It's impossible. That was the conversation, that it's impossible for her to love me. No, it's not. It's really not that difficult. But you also, and I think also in the community, something that I get a lot of shit for is when I say, like, as trans people, you have to acknowledge though that we are different. We are different. Like, I'm okay with being different. I'm different. I look like a man. I sound like a man. But I can't, you know, there are certain things that are important in relationships that I can't give. My wife wants a child. I can't give you a child. I'm sorry. I can't do that for you.
You grew up without any trans or influences, and I know, well, at least in the beginning, you said you didn't really know anyone to talk to about this stuff, or it wasn't really talked about in pop culture.
Yeah, I would say it's more that it wasn't talked about more in the mainstream. It was always there, but it wasn't something that I was aware of. And to be honest, even now that I put my face out there, I put my voice out there. I have, you know, I mentor other trans guys. I talk to people. Outside of this space, I don't really care that much. I don't talk to, like, I don't go looking for trans friends. I don't, because it's not that big of a deal. Like, this is more of a space where, I want to help other people have a place in a community where they can feel safe to talk about stuff and get no nonsense. Like, I'm not gonna bullshit you. Like, if it hurts your feelings, I'm sorry.
I know some people don't have access to, you know, that they don't have access to that sort of community. Like, they might not have anyone to ask questions to, or, and I know every community has its flaws, like you said.
Of course. I don't go around being like, hey, are you trans? Like,
exactly.
Or, you know, and I don't go around telling people, hey, I'm transgender. Like, because it's not, why does it matter?
I agree with that, but also I think it is, I don't know, it's important to have community too. It's just like,
it is important to have community, but there's a time and place for it. I don't have to go around and saying, hey, like, first off, it's not safe to just tell anybody that. That's one. And two, my whole thing is, if you're not financing me, feeding me, or fucking me, it's none of your business.
Yeah.
If I'm going to sit here and say I'm a guy just like everybody else, then why do I have to parade around and tell everybody I'm trans? I'm saying I'm a guy like everybody else, so what's the point of saying it? Now, granted, if I was in a situation where I wasn't married and I was out there dating, I'm gonna be upfront and be like, hey, I'm a transgender man. Like, I was not born a man. You know, I don't have sperm. I can't impregnate you. If that's something you're looking for, if you want children, I don't even want children, but if you want children, I can't give them to you anyway. Like, I'm gonna be upfront about that, because not everybody can handle, and a lot of people don't like hearing that, but that's the reality. A lot of people can't handle being in a relationship with someone who's transgender. There's a financial burden. There's an emotional burden. There's so much it's so much nuance in being with someone who's, and my wife could tell you, she, because we've lived it. When I had surgery, that was fear for her. Even though it, you know, these surgeries are common and they're not like specific to transgender men or transgender people, they're invasive surgeries.
Yeah.
You're being put under. You don't know what can happen. You don't know if I'm going to wake up. That's the reality of it. And I'm the breadwinner of my house. If I don't wake up, you're fucked.
Yeah.
That's a lot of emotional baggage for your partner.
Yeah.
You know, that's doctor's appointments. You know, I'm taking testosterone. I'll be on testosterone the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. That's money. That costs money. That there's, again, surgery that, I literally, they're wheeling my ass back and she's crying because she's like, oh my God, like, you're going to go have surgery now. Then there's a grief period of, you know, feeling like you lost that person. Not necessarily that she lost me, but it's the loss of what you perceived me as.
Yeah.
You're losing that, you know, there's so much nuance into being in a relationship with a transgender person. I understand why a lot of people don't. I don't think it's transphobic. I hate hearing that. I get a lot of shit because I tell people it's not transphobic. And I'm like, it's not though. You have to understand that this isn't a new thing, but it feels like a new thing to a lot of people, for one. And for two, again, there's so much nuance into being in a relationship. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't survive that. What
would you tell someone who is trans in the dating scene, like, in regards to what telling the other person?
Be upfront from the gate, from day one. Be upfront, because why put yourself in a position? First off, transgender people are killed at a higher rate than any other community. Specifically, trans women of color are killed at a higher rate than any other community. Now, I'm not blaming trans people for that, because regardless, it shouldn't be happening. And I'd say that for any crime, it shouldn't happen. But the reality is we don't live in a utopia. So you have to take measures to protect yourself from potential situations.
What if, you know, you might not feel safe telling them?
Then you shouldn't be with them if you don't feel safe telling them anyway.
Yeah.
So that's the first. My advice would be this. Let's say you're this a trans person and you're talking online to someone, and it's your first interaction with them. Tell them straight up. Like, you know, you can feel them out for a little bit. Maybe like a day or two. Feel them out. See how you vibe with that person. You know, within the first 30 seconds of meeting someone if you like them or not. That's reality. That's just the way our brains work. That's how we work as humans. You can tell if you got chemistry with someone or not. Well, within that day, you should be able to be like, hey, I want you to be aware, and it's okay if you're not okay with this, but I want you to have a choice in this. I'm a transgender man, or I'm a transgender woman. And if they don't know what that means, explain to them what that means. Hey, I was assigned female at birth. I was assigned male at birth, or however you want to say it. I was born as a woman. I was born in whatever terminology you want to use that you think is appropriate for you. Because I'm not going to tell people what they should or shouldn't say. But explain that up front. This is where I came from. This is who I am right now. This is what I look like. It's what I sound like. But this is the reality of my situation. If you can't deal with that, I completely understand. And there's no hard feelings. And you don't have to continue talking to me. Be upfront with people. Don't drag it on 2-3 months, 2-3 weeks, and getting somebody in their feelings attached to you, or you getting attached to someone and they don't know that pertinent information. Because at the end of the day, it's going to come to a point where you're either going to have sex. You're going to have sex with this person at some point in time. You're going to meet this person, and the way you look in your picture may not be how you look in real life, or, you know, they may pick up on something. You don't put yourself in a predicament where you could potentially be harmed. And that's not me blaming the victim. That's me saying, as humans, we have a responsibility to our survival. That's survival. That's not about being transphobic. That's not about victim blaming. Survival. If you have to be smart about what you do and don't do.
Yeah.
Just be upfront with people. There are so many people out there who will either be like, yeah, I'm okay with that. Or you might have people that be like, you know what? That's not for me. I don't have any, maybe we could be friends, or I got nothing against it. That's just not for me. And I've seen guys and I've talked to guys who'll say, well, that's transphobic. Why don't they want to date me? They should tell me why. Nobody owes you an answer. Don't be weird. Don't be a creep. Nobody owes you an answer. They don't want to date you. They don't have to explain why they don't want to date you. Go find somebody that wants to date you.
Yeah. The answer is so simple. And yet I feel people overcomplicate it.
And I get it, because it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about identity. And people, we all instinctually as humans want to be accepted. We want to be loved. We want to have relationships. We want intimacy. We're social creatures. We thrive in social environments. We're not meant to be alone. So I understand why it gets hurtful or frustrating for people. But you, again, have to be realistic. Not everybody is going to be cool with that. So be upfront, because no matter, sometimes it's not just about, oh, it's because it's not even sometimes that they don't see you as that way. Again, like, you're looking at me right now. I look like a man, right? I sound like a man. You know, yeah. I don't think I'm an ugly guy. I know I'm not. I don't care even if you said I was an ugly guy. I'm not an ugly guy, right? So that's fine and everything else. But then I may be like, hey, I had surgery. I have scars. I have this or I have that. You might just be like, oh, okay, that's a little much for me. You're a good looking guy and I respect you as a man and all that other thing, but that's not for me.
Or you might be, I love the person you are and it doesn't matter.
Exactly. Like my wife.
Yeah, exactly.
I love the person you are and it doesn't matter.
Oh, God. I want to keep going for hours, but wrapping up. Yeah, you've been such a great guest. I feel like I have barely had to say anything and you're just
I'm sorry. I have a habit of talk.
You're a professional, I can tell. But no, you're very active in like the trans community, sounds like. Can you tell me a little bit about like what you do outside of podcasting and stuff?
I have more of a focus on my YouTube channel. Every Friday nights I do a live stream where guys can come in and ask me questions. I do tend to focus on the transgender community, but I'm totally fine with anyone coming into that space respectfully and having good intention conversations, because I think it's important, like you said, for us to have these conversations. Even if you're not trans, maybe you just want to understand. Maybe you just want to be an ally, but you need to understand, you want to ask questions. So I run a live stream every Friday nights at 9:30 Eastern time, and I'll answer questions. I'll shoot the shit with people. We'll talk, and then I post videos every Tuesday on my YouTube channel. I'll pick a topic, something pertinent to the trans community, whether it's I focus more on mindset than anything else. I know a lot of people see me as like the big brother trans guy, you know, but really I talk about mindset, because regardless of being trans, regardless of being, you know, gay, straight, lesbian, whatever you are, it doesn't matter. Like, before any of those things, you're a human being. And if you're not right up here in your mind, none of that shit matters.
Yeah, I agree 100%. So your podcast is kind of like branching off of that.
Yeah, so I had first started off in the podcast, and I wanted to do a focus on mental health, mindset, emotions, breaking down emotions in a logical way. And then eventually I got to a place where I wanted to start focusing on the trans community, because I started seeing so much negativity, so much conversation from people who aren't transgender and don't know what they're talking about, or who don't even look into like the science or anything about it. And so I said, you know what? I want to do something different. And YouTube just seemed to be the best platform for it, because I don't know what it is, a lot of trans people are on YouTube. And I also saw that there weren't any people of color who were trans. And there weren't any trans men who were out there who were talking about the nuances of being socialized as a woman and now being thrust into a male world.
Yeah.
And the mindset behind that, and dealing with the mental and emotional ramifications sometimes of transitioning. That doesn't get talked about. It's always about medical transition, what you look like, what you sound like, and that's great. And I still have those conversations, but my main focus is the mentality, the mindset, the social aspect of transition.
What's your stream called if people want to go find you on there?
And realistically free on all platforms. Just realistically free on YouTube. That's my YouTube channel. That's my podcast, and that's my Instagram. Realistically free.
I'm so excited to listen to more episodes of your podcast. Like, literally, I added like 5 of them to my bookmarks folder. Right now I'm listening to The Secret to the Perfect Relationship.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That was one of my that one's one of my favorites. I got another one that's going to be coming out probably in the next couple of weeks. It's going to be a Purpose or Passion.
Ooh, I'm definitely going to gobble that up.
Yes.
Yeah, Mike knows the secret to the perfect relationship, y'all.
No. Wait till you listen to... I don't know if you haven't started it yet, right?
No, I'm like halfway through.
Oh, so then you realize
I was trying to trick the audience into going...
into listening to it.
Yeah, I know you're not helping yourself here. I'm trying to get you listeners.
I keep it real, okay? I'm going to be all the way 1,000. Nobody knows anything. I'm just a guy on the internet.
That's fair. Thank you so much. You've been incredible. Do you have anything else you want to say before we say goodbye?
No, that was everything. I appreciate you having me on, and you definitely you got to get on my podcast so you can talk a little bit now.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I'm bad at talking. That's why I prefer being the host, because I just get to like listen to people tell me their deepest, darkest secrets and cry.
That's horrible.
That's great.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Oh man, but yeah, go listen to Mike's podcast, Realistically Free, and his YouTube channel and all that other stuff. And yeah, I'll be hitting you up. I'm so happy to have met you.
It's always nice to meet new people.
Yeah. All right. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of Pickles and Vodka. If you could relate to anything we talked about, you can follow the podcast at Pickles and Vodka Podcast on Instagram, on Facebook by typing in Pickles and Vodka Podcast. You can also email me at picklesandvodkapodcast@gmail.com if you have any stories or if you just want to say hi. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Stay safe.